Hello and welcome to this second class on descriptive writing. And in this class, our main focus is going to be on appealing to the sensory details of the reader. And by this, what I mean is that we would try to paint a picture uh, with our words so that the reader can make a good image of those words in their mind. And as you might all know, that there are 5 senses that we employ to get information about the world around us. And these senses include the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, the sense of taste, and the sense of touch. So if somehow our writing kind of expresses the ideas in such a way that the reader is able to identify uh, with his own experiences, with his own experience of what he has seen or smelled or heard. And if our writing evokes the same images in the reader's mind, it is very easy for us to uh, kind of connect with the reader's personal experiences, and our writing would automatically make a lot more effect on the reader. So we can talk more about this, but then let me just talk a little about what we did in our last class. Descriptive writing, as you might recall, is a piece of writing that tries to describe a person, place, a thing, a feeling, but the main purpose or objective of descriptive writing is to paint this picture in such a way so that the reader can get a very clear lifelike image of whatever we're describing in their mind. And it is exactly for this particular reason that they can form a clear image of what we write in their head, that the idea of appealing to sensory details has its significance. So let us just begin with the formal introduction of this class, and let's have a look at sensory details, for example, which is the main topic of this class. And I will repeat the idea that descriptive writing is about painting a clear picture in the reader's mind about whatever you're trying to describe, and appealing to the sensory details is one of the key techniques of descriptive writing that can help you to write a convincing piece of of a description. And by appealing to sensory details, you can create a lifelike image in the reader's mind, which would help you to express yourself or communicate yourself very clearly and in a more emphatic way. Now, just to bring my point home, I would like you to have a look at 2 different sentences and try to compare them. One of these sentences is just without any sensory details. It does not try to appeal to sensory details, but the other sentence tries to evoke these sensory images in the reader by appealing to the senses of sight and to the sense of hearing especially. So the first sentence is the huge Alsatian with black and light brown strips bared its teeth and crunched repeatedly and noisily at the bone in its big powerful jaws. You get to know about the breed of the dog and how big it is and what color is its skin, and then you can picture it moving back its lips and baring its teeth, and then with that big jaw, with that big huge powerful jaw, it kind of crunches, or it kind of shatters the bone that it is holding in its powerful jaw. Now, if you just compare the sentence with the second sentence, which simply says the dog ate the bone, then as you can see that the second sentence practically communicates the same information, but it does not contain the relevant sensory details in it. You cannot picture this these black and light yellow, light brown strips, and you cannot imagine the breed, the huge Alsatian. You cannot imagine the breed of the dog, and similarly, the word crunched or noisily, that helps you connect with the way that the sounds that were produced as this dog was eating the bone. So the first sentence would probably be more convincing in creating a good, clear picture of what happened. The second sentence conveys the same thing, but then it's not as interesting as the first one. Let's have a look at some more examples of sensory details, and I'm sure that you will appreciate the fact that by using certain words that the reader can associate with certain images as in what they can see, what they can hear, what they can touch, or what they can taste or smell, then the writing becomes more lifelike. And that is exactly what is meant by appealing to sensory details. You write in such a way so that the reader can identify his experiences with your writing, his experiences of seeing things or smelling things, of tasting things with your writing, and that would make your writing more lifelike. So let's consider the first example. It is about the sense of sight. So let's have a look at this sense of sight. The flashing blue lights from the police mobile cars lit up the dark, secluded street. So if you read the sentence again, I'm sure most of us can visualize the blue car, the blue revolving light on top of the police mobile cars flashing on the walls around in a street. And if it's a dark, secluded street, I'm sure that the contrast is more clear and visible, and you can actually picture what is happening there. The car is standing in the middle of the street, and its blue flashing light is lighting up the dark walls of the street. So this particular sentence appeals to the sense of sight, and it helps the reader to imagine what the scene looked like. So it's a good sentence, or it's a good example of a sentence that appeals to your sense of sight. The second sentence would be appealing to the sense of hearing. So let's have a look at this. The wind swirled around our rooftop, whistling loudly to a terrible tune. So the word swirl is, well, it's like kind of moving in circles, but then if you look at the last few words of the sentence, which says whistling loudly to a terrible tune. So the wind swirled around a rooftop, whistling loudly to a terrible tune. So whistling loudly to a terrible tune creates a sense of hearing that we can all identify with. That swoosh, or that sound produced by swirling winds, especially when it gathers the dust, is something that we can all relate to because we've all experienced it. So the last few words, whistling loudly, the wind whistling loudly to a terrible tune, can help us to identify with what we've all heard. And that is how this sentence appeals to our sense of hearing. Sense of smell. The warm summer air smelled of freshly cut grass. So I'm sure that as we walk on these on a freshly cut grass, there's a particular smell that comes out of it, and most of us can identify with that. So when this writer says that this warm summer air smelled of freshly cut grass, although it's difficult for us to smell it, but then because we have an experience of smelling these freshly cut grass, we can relate to our senses of smell and what we've experienced in our lives after smelling this freshly cut grass, and that experience together with these words can appeal to our sensation of smell. Sense of touch. The heavy quilt felt like an X-ray vest draped across our legs. So if you say something, our vest draped across our legs, it simply means that it's completely covering you, and then it's the sense, the word heavy actually adds to the meaning of the sense of touch, and it is like that you are kind of caught up in this vest or piece of clothing, and that's completely covered your legs, and you cannot move your legs, and it's weighing heavily on you. So the idea of being caught up and not being able to move your legs, and something weighing heavily down on your leg, is something that we have experienced in our daily lives, or at times. So by reading this sentence, the same experience can be brought to our mind, and we can identify with this sentence because it appeals to our senses of touch. Sense of taste: sweet, juicy strawberries. So it's a simple expression, it's not even a complete sentence, but then sweet, juicy strawberries is something that we've all tasted, and it's something, once again, which you can all relate to, and it appeals to our senses of taste, especially because the word sweet is there and the word juicy is there. Now, this is something that we talked about a little in the earlier class, comparing narrative and descriptive writing. And we did talk about the idea that in narrative writing, which is what you've probably covered before descriptive writing, there is a series of events that happen to the main character one after the other. And a story writing or narrative is kind of focused on those events that happen to the main character. But at the same time, in most stories that you've read, you would see that as the story talks about that flow of time, it also focuses on the description of characters and the places that come in the story. There's normally a description of the characters of the main character or other supporting characters, and that helps the story to be brought to life. That actually makes the story more lifelike, and we can actually, with these descriptions, we can identify with the characters or with the place, and that is what is normally present in narrative writing. Similarly, in descriptive writing, although the focus is on talking about a particular object or person, we're going to describe that person, but at the same time, a reference to a flow of time or some events which are happening in the background would actually make it more easier for the reader to follow what you're trying to describe. So although the focus on descriptive writing is not on the story, but some sense of events happening in the background would actually make your description more lifelike. So in a way, narrative and descriptive writings do share some commonalities, because in narrative writing, we use some parts of descriptive writing. Similarly, in descriptive writing, some sense of events that are happening will actually make it more easier to write a descriptive piece. Now, here is a sample passage, and I would like to have a look. I'd like all of you to have a look at this, and I'm going to read it to you. This passage is a descriptive passage, and you'll be able to see that it tries to appeal to the sensory details, and at the same time, it uses a little bit of a figurative language, which is another useful way of describing something. So let us have a look at this passage and see how does it actually try to bring out the image in a convincing manner to us. So the sample passage is: high wind in Jamaica. The sun was still red and large, the sky above cloudless, and light blue glaze poured over baking clay, but close over the ground a dirty grey haze hovered. As they followed the lane towards the sea, they came to a place where yesterday a fair-sized spring had bubbled up by the roadside. Now it was dry, But even as they passed, some water splashed out, and then it was dry again, although gurgling inwardly to itself. But the group of children were hot, far too hot to speak to one another. They sat on their ponies as loosely as possible, longing for the sea. The morning advanced. The heated air grew quite easily hotter, as if from some enormous furnace from which it could draw at will. Bullocks only shifted their stinging feet when they could bear the soil no longer. Even the insects were too lethargic to pipe. The basking lizards hid themselves and panted. It was so still you could have heard the least buzz a mile off. Not a naked fish would willingly move his tail. The ponies advanced because they must. The children ceased even to think. Now, if you look again at this passage, it is just trying to express this extreme degree of hotness uh, in terms of weather, and that is the dominant idea in this passage. But in describing this, there are areas where the writing tries to uh, bring out the sense of touch or the sense of sight to us, and that helps us to imagine the situation a little better. So let's have a look at what exactly uh, is in this writing passage that can appeal to the sensory details, and if there are any figures of speech or um, that could actually make the writing more lifelike, we're also going to have a look at that. So sense of sight, the sun was still red and large, and the sky above was cloudless. So when you look at the word red and large, that gives you a clear image of what the sun looked like. So this is like appealing to the sense of sight. Similarly, when it says gurgling inwards to itself, it talks about a body of water that gurgled inwards to itself. It was inside the water, under the earth, and then it gurgled. Gurgle is like, it's just like that you can imagine the sound that we produce when gurgling water in our own throats. So once again, the word gurgles appeals to the sense of sound. Sense of touch. Bullocks only shifted their stinging feet when they could bear the soil no longer. So the phrase stinging feet gives us an idea that it was so hot, the ground was so hot that the feet of these bullocks even hurt, and because of the extreme degree of temperature in that environment. Even the insects were too lethargic to pipe. To pipe is, of course, that kind of appeals to the sense of hearing. That the insects could not produce any sounds, or they did not make any sounds because they were too lazy because of the extreme heat. And then there is one other example, like it was so still you could have heard the least buzz a mile off. Everything was so still and it was so quiet that even a small sound, which is even a mile away, you could actually hear that. So this is an example of a figure of speech which is called as a hyperbole, and this is kind of an exaggeration. I'm sure there are other figures of speech that you might know of, like similes or metaphors or personification. In some other class, we would definitely be looking at it if possible. So the idea of sensory details and figure of speech can actually help the writing become more lifelike and bring it to life also. So with this, I would suggest that let me just give you a small exercise, and it is a small passage, a small paragraph without much descriptions added to it, but I would want you to read it, and then I would want you to rewrite this paragraph, adding some description of your own, which applies to which can actually connect with the reader's sense of sight, or a sense of hearing or sense of touch. The idea is that you write something so that whatever you write appeals to the sensory details of the readers, and the reader could create an image of this piece of writing in their head. So let's have a look at this exercise. It says the weather was hot. I sat on the table and ate a few pieces of watermelon. Later, I sat in front of TV and watched my favorite cartoon. So there isn't much description or appeal to sensory details in this short paragraph. I'd want you to rewrite this paragraph using sensory details so that it makes an impression on the reader. I hope you'd be able to do that. And in our next class, hopefully, we are going to look at a complete essay, and we're going to see how writing a descriptive essay should work in an examination. So with this, we come to the end of the class. Thank you very much for listening.